So a few people helped me with this segment. I went over to gaming Slack I belong to and Indie Game Reading Club, and Kit and Ralph and Mikhail were huge helps. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. They got me info I needed, and it was really helpful. So thank you very much for your help. On to the Preludes. Ooh, that was a prelude to a thing about Preludes. In Vampire the Masquerade, back in the day, it had a green marble cover with like a red rose on it. It was a very striking cover compared to everything else that was out on the market. Kind of interesting. And in that book, they mentioned Preludes, which I really loved. It was something I really took with me from Vampire the Masquerade to a bunch of other games. And I didn't play a lot of Vampire. I had a bunch of friends who were huge LARPers, and I had friends who loved the game and loved goth stuff. But I wasn't a huge fan of it. But I thought that part was really interesting, and I used it a bunch. And looking at the text of those games and what they said about Preludes, it's interesting. It's interesting to me because one of the things they say in the text is that, if it should only be one player and one GM, unless the characters knew each other, and then you can maybe do a prelude with two people, which I've done before too. That can cause problems, but it's pretty cool. But what's interesting is that they don't bring up the technique of someone plays their character and someone else plays an NPC who is a friend of theirs, which is, I think, a really cool thing to do because it teaches players to play supporting roles. For that prelude, session, the character knows they're not the main character. They're just there to add something to the main character's backstory. And so it kind of teaches support in a way that I think is really important. And it's also interesting that they didn't say to do that, right? Because I know that the designers of Nephew and Ryan Hagen, who designed Vampire, designed Ars Magica, which introduced me to troop style play and probably coined that phrase. And in troop style play, you would play different. There were a bunch of grogs on the table, and anyone could play a grog. The ownership of characters and character fidelity was messed with in a way that I think is really cool, that I haven't seen done again in an interesting way until Band of Blades, which is really nifty. Love it, love it. So I love Preludes. I think they're really good. And I ended up using them in an Ars Magica game, a couple of Ars Magica games I ran. I ended up using them in a Burning Wheel game I ran. I was talking about it with friends this afternoon over Messenger, right? Over Facebook Messenger. And we were talking about that first Burning Wheel game I ran that was just this glorious hot mess. And it's glorious because I made a lot of friends in that game. Friends who I still have to this day, almost over a decade later. And because of that, it's always going to have a warm place in my heart. It's a cool thing. It's an amazing relic. But when I look back on that game, wow, it was overly ambitious, right? If someone came to me and they were like, "Hey, I want to run a Burning Wheel game like this," I would say, maybe don't, right? Where one player is a dwarf, one player is an elf, one player is a human, and every stock is and another's an orc, and they're all adventuring together to save the world from hell that's bubbling up. I would say, maybe scale that back. So what I did to make the world more palatable and kind of define things for us is I had preludes. And in the preludes, players would pick up different characters within that stock. So for the orc character, there'd be an all-orc session. And then for the elf character, there'd be an all-elf session. I don't remember an all-human session. And I don't know why I don't remember that. That thing seems like something that would have been good and should have happened. And maybe it did, and it's just, umpteen years later, and I just don't remember. But the cool thing about that is it allowed us all to define the world a little more. We all got to learn about it a little more, and we all got to get on the same page on what the vibe of the world was, which was really useful. And it felt like a low-stakes warm-up. We got to learn things about a complicated system without feeling like we're going to lose our character over it because we don't know the game well enough. So it got us to warm up and learn Burning Wheel. I think there are a lot of good things to say about Preludes. And having a little bit of a warm-up game before the game, to get to flesh out the backstory a little bit. I think that can be really cool. So you might be at this point asking yourself, Judd, or you might be asking me, but I can't hear you, Judd, why wouldn't you have two characters go on a prelude together? Okay, that's a good question, I would say to you, if I could hear you. What happened with my game is that what ended up happening is we had two Magi in an Ars Magica game who ended up very close. And they kind of bonded and isolated themselves from other characters, and it caused problems. I think there was interpersonal things at stake there. There were other things going on. It's far more complicated than just that. But it is something to watch out for, and it is something well worth talking about if you were to use Preludes, and if you were to have two characters go on the same prelude. And maybe it makes sense. Maybe two characters were siblings. And so it makes sense for them both to have the same prelude because they're going to be in the same spot. But something to think about. Hey, when you have those characters join the rest of the party, be like, hey, don't click up. Unless that's really how the fun is going to be had. But if you find clicking up is messing up the fun, unclick yourself, right? So how would I do Preludes? How would I do it now? How would I do it with D&D? How would I use them? I think you can use them in a bunch of ways, and they're super fun. One way is just as a method of... So you could do it with the player characters, right? So you're learning something about the player character. So you can say to the player, hey, look at your character sheet. Find something on it. Let's learn why you're that way in the Prelude session. Pick one thing, and you run the game until we find out why they're that way, and then we move on, maybe to the next Prelude, right? So, maybe they have the trait stubborn. All right, we're going to find out why you're stubborn this game. And you don't have to tell them, well, it's because your mom is stubborn, right? But you're going to find out. You'll find out through play. Fun. Very cool. What's something else you can do with Preludes? Preludes can also be a cool way to learn the rules in a low-stakes environment. So you can have a Prelude where it doesn't have anything to do with the characters at all, right? It just has to do with the world. I've got this vague idea in my head of a Burning Wheel Prelude where we have a duel of wits that's deciding the new pope, and we have a range and cover. Range and cover is like cool ranged combat, where you're kind of like diving behind cover and then popping out and hitting someone with your arrow and then diving back and reloading, and, all that good stuff. So a cool ranged and cover combat where a bunch of assassins are in the palace and they're trying to kill the heir to the kingdom. And then a fight that's some kind of judicial duel that will decide something very large about the kingdom itself. And what I would hope that Prelude would do is set up the whole campaign, right? What I would hope it would number one, it would teach players how to do ranging, a little bit of how to do range and cover, how to do fight, how to do duel of wits. So you can use Preludes to teach a segment of the game that you want the players to have down pat, and they can do it in a way where their character isn't at stake in the learning. That's fun. The other thing you can do is you can use it to create situation, right? So, if the assassins kill the king, suddenly the king kill the heir, suddenly the kingdom is destabilized, right? But maybe not. Maybe they don't kill them. Maybe the last assassin gets to the heir and says, "I can't do this. I don't kill kids," because maybe one of the players is playing that assassin. That's interesting. Cool. And so that would be my hope. I think you could use Preludes for a bunch of different things. So you can use them for setting up situation. You can use them for learning the origins of your characters. You can use them for just fleshing things out. You know, just letting people, let's just roll some dice and low stakes. The adventure hasn't started yet. The world isn't ending. You're young. We're going to go, and you can tell the players this. We're going to do some skill rolls. You're going to learn some basics about the system and how the dice work. You're going to learn a little bit about the setting and what your character is like. And then that'll be it. It's a nice, chill first game. So it could be a really good thing to do with new players, because you're telling them, hey, you're getting a warm-up. This is your warm-up. Right? And so it could be a really fun way to do that. And I would just position the veteran gamers in cool places, right? You can position, when you have a veteran gamer and a bunch of new gamers and you're setting up a new game, set up the veteran gamer in a Gandalf-like role so that they can support people, and not tell people, oh, you fool of a took. Hopefully not do that too much. So, for example, I ran a Burning Wheel game with my dad. It was set in Westeros, and my dad and his friend, and they had just binge watched all of Game of Thrones, right? So I ran this game for them, and my buddy Whit, who I've gamed with since college, played their maester, which in the Westerosi world are like these scholar monks, and it was Whit was perfect, right? He knew a bunch of the setting stuff. He knows about the game. He could give helping dice. He could give advice. My lord, I'm not sure if that's a good idea. Maybe you want to think this through. And he wasn't going to be upset if he wasn't listened to, because he knew he was playing kind of a supporting role. And it was super cool. Thank you, Whit. Just amazing. So that's another lesson that we're learning from this Prelude conversation with myself, is that it could be a really good learning tool. So that's what I'm thinking about. Preludes, a really fun technique out of the original Vampire the Masquerade book, I think, and it's one I don't hear people talk about a lot. And so I thought about it, and I was like, where did I get that from? Did I get it from Ars Magica? I think I got it from Vampire, and I did. So good stuff. Really good stuff. And you can break those rules. The Vampire, the Vampire Prelude, says like, hey, this is how you should do it. But, wiggle it around. Play with it. See what else. What else can you do? What can you do with a warm-up game? What is everyone going to learn? I think that's kind of neat. And that way, when you hit the adventure running. And the players have this cool little place to let their imaginations limber up. Good stuff. Let me know how you've used Preludes in your games, or how you've done warming up in your games, and I'd love to hear from you. My contact info will be at the end in the outro, so hang on for that. But for now, the IG, the one and only, what you've really been listening for, the Inspiration Goat. IG, what do you have for us this week? So Inspiration Goat brought me the Elric books, the Elric novels, which were some of my first fantasy novels when I was a kid. I read the books with the slim, soft covers with silver covers and cool art. And it was really, really a lot of fun. And I ended up rereading them, or rereading a bunch of them, a reprint of them, because I was going to be running my buddy Storn on a game that we said, like, hey, I want this to have a sword and sorcery feel, right? It wanted to have kind of a gritty sword and sorcery feel. And Elric and Moorcock were like a couple, Michael Moorcock is the author of the Elric books. And Elric was written as kind of an anti-Conan. Right? He's sorcerous. He's physically weak. He needs sorcery and his vampire sword to survive. and so he was written as kind of an anti-Conan, and so that was a touchstone for our game. Storn wasn't playing an Elric character, but this is just one of the sword and sorcery bits that was on our mind. And so I was rereading them. And in the first Elric story, Elric is beaten up. His awesome vampire sword is stolen from him. He is thrown out of the castle, and his friends are in the forest. And he's thrown out of the castle by the wizard, and his friends are in the forest, and and one of them is like, "Hey, we should go get him," and the other friend, and there's a bunch of them. There's like a bunch of mercenaries, and the other friend says, "No, he needs to crawl to the forest because we don't want the wizard to know that we're here." So Elric has to crawl on his hands and knees across this field to the forest to get to his friend so he can get healing because he's so weak. All right. At around that time, Storn's character has a series of bad die rolls and gets captured. And the person who captures him ties him up and says, "I'm taking you to this big bad guy, and you're gonna pay for what you've done." And I would have felt bad if I hadn't been reading the books and been like, you know what, this is very in genre. And I want to think about how to think about defeat, how to think about bad rolls, how to think about games where things don't go well for the heroes, and it's not necessarily mean they don't go well for the players, right? I want a differentiation there, and to set those expectations. Hey, let people know, like, hey, there's a good chance you might lose, and that's okay. That's a type of story that might come out of this. And the other thing I really do when I've got someone who's losing a lot, and that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about that particular instance of Elric, where Elric really gets the crap kicked out of him and gets everything that's special taken away from him, and then has to come back and kick ass. So, how do we set that game up? How do we tell the player stuff? Well, the first thing you do is you don't like, oh man, you are a screw up. The other adventurers think you're a loser. You are just a cautionary tale. Have the other characters, have losing and getting beat up and taking a beating and all the things that are going to happen to the players be an acknowledged part of that lifestyle, right? When I was running Blades in the Dark and people couldn't show up for a game, one of the things they were like, oh man, this is a really important job, and one of the characters just isn't around. And I was like, yeah, let's role play it as just something that happens in the life of scoundrels. Sometimes people just don't show up. If they showed up every day, they'd have a 9-to-5 job. But life is complicated as a scoundrel, and sometimes people just don't show up. We don't even bring it up because we don't know what they're going through. It might be family, it might be something else, could be a drug problem. Just don't bring it up. And so that became the table agreement. We just didn't bring it up when a character, because I didn't want characters throwing it in each other's face, right? I don't want my buddy Jason not to be there because his kid is sick, and then he has to come to the next game and eat shit for his character because he wasn't there at an important job. That sucks. No way. Let's just get past that, and we can decide to just get past it. Just make it a normal part of people's lives. So when the adventurers trudge back into town, and their 10-foot pole is broken, and their armor is stolen, and their swords are rusted, and they're out of gold, and they just don't know what to do, rather than have the other adventurers in town be like, ha ha ha, losers. Unless you want to establish a villain, then maybe one group does it. But the rest of the group should be like, yeah, sometimes that's the way it goes, man. Adventuring is tough. This is a really dumb way to make a living. If it was smart, we'd do something else. Right? We're at the bottom of our options here. So, yeah, sometimes that's the way it goes. I'll buy you a drink. Everyone knows what it's like to be down on your luck like that. So that does a couple of cool things. Number one, it normalizes players taking chances and losing, right? Because if you just belittle them for losing, they will do everything they can to avoid losing. So don't belittle them. The other cool thing it does is it sets up a situation where another adventuring group or another adventuring friend comes to them in a bad way and says, hey, I hate to cash in that shit, but I just had a really bad day. I just got mugged. All my scrolls were taken. I need a hand. I need some help. So if you set up a community of helping each other, the cool thing is, number one, the players will get some help, and they won't feel like, oh man, we are losers. And so they won't avoid conflict. But the other thing that'll happen is you set up a cool, dramatic situation where someone comes to them for help because reciprocity is where it's at. And then you'll learn what kind of characters the players are playing. Maybe the characters are like, no, and they turn them away. And then they've made their choice. Then things can get kind of ugly. But most time people kind of want to be fair, I found. Most players want to play decent people. And so, they help someone out and they get kind of embroiled in those adventures. Maybe they find they care about something about one of that character's shenanigans. And then we're off to the races. Now we're cooking with gas. So that's where I'm at. I'm thinking about losing. Thinking about getting your teeth kicked in. It's a standard part of like noir detective stories, right? The detective gets the crap beaten out of them and then comes back and gets the evidence and does what needs doing. Brick was great for that. And I mean, just about every noir story, I mean, it's there. So yeah, and just normalize it with the player. Like, hey, that's a rough night. Hey, another thing I did that I want to talk about is and I talked about this a bit with the Bina Janos game, right? Sean was playing a servant who didn't own shoes, who was deciding to go on this adventure to end a war between the dwarves and the elves. And she ended up succeeding, which shocked me because I didn't think that's how it was going to go. But one of the things I did is because her character had no skills to do this, right? Unless you really burn up a brutal character, if you roll up a shoeless servant in Burning Wheel, you're going to be able to do things that a shoeless servant could do. You'll have a couple points for wiggle room, but Sean was really hard on himself with how he spent his points. He didn't have a secret fire sorcery power, or he wasn't playing that rare, servant, low-born servant who suddenly, peasant-born servant who has an amazing knife skill. He just wasn't. He played it. So you can have the other characters in the game be impressed by that. That takes a lot of moxie. And I did. I had players be impressed by that. And there was one point where the Duchess comes from the capital and meets Sean's character and is very impressed that she actually traveled, that this shoeless woman got stabbed in the eye by an elf and then went north to try to beseech the dwarves to not go to war. Right? She was impressed by that bravery, and rightly so. And so when one of her nieces said something shitty about Bina Janos, the Duchess made an example of her for the other characters to see. And that was my way of showing, hey, this Duchess is impressed by what you did and takes these things as learning opportunities. She is here to teach her nieces and nephews how to rule. And she knows that when she's gone, they're going to be all that's left to guide the dynasty that is their family. So you can have supportive characters who aren't just laughing at them. It's also a good time to set up a villain, right? If you want a villain who's going to kick them when they're down, absolutely. But let them know, hey, that's a villain, right? What a jerk. Sometimes when GMs are taking on the role of an NPC who's a jerk. Sometimes they do it so well that it's like, are they on the jerk side? Don't be on the jerk side, okay? So that's a GMing tip. Anyway, defeat. That's what I'm thinking about. Elric. Having your weakness, stomped on, and losing. And sometimes if we go by the dice, sometimes that's how it goes. So that's the way it is. Thank you, Inspiration Goat. That was a good one. A very good one. It was a lot of fun. I like talking about that. All right. Let's get to the outro. Thank you so much for listening. If you would like to contribute to the show, there are a couple ways you can do that. You can leave a review over on iTunes or on whatever podcast app you are utilizing, and that helps with the algorithm, and I would appreciate it. You can tweet at me. Send me a tweet. Reply to the show. Reply to me. Tell me what's going. If you're on Twitter, send me what's going, or on Mastodon or wherever. I'm at underscore Judd. I'm at Judd underscore of underscore KRYOS, and there's a link to my Twitter account in the show notes every week, so you can find me there. You can send me an email and just let me know what's going on at your table. If something I said rattles true or rattles false for you, let me know what's up. I'd love to hear from you. I like hearing about what's going on at your game. So, yeah, hit me up. My email is judd.karlman@gmail.com. I'll say it again in case you need to get your pen. judd.karlman@gmail.com. There are donation links for a number of causes, because Black Lives Matter and Trans Lives Matter. If you are thinking about giving money to the show, please give money there. That's where it's at for right now. It's where it's at always, but I don't need more money coming in from the show at this moment. I'm very lucky. I'm very privileged. Thank you that you were thinking of that, but please give to those causes. That's what the world needs right now, more than this. If you do, drop me a line. Let me know what's up. Let me know. I really appreciate that. I love hearing about us making the world a little better together through this wondrous nonsense that we do with our friends. And that is about it. I can feel the first chilly breezes of autumn just on the tips of the wind. Some leaves are changing color. I'm seeing some yellow leaves, some dry leaves. They're falling. It's starting to shift. Things are the summer is packing away its summer dress and getting out its black hat and scarf. So we'll see. I love autumn. It's my favorite season, and I hope your season went well wherever you are, and I hope you're doing all right through all this shenanigans that's going on in the world right now. I hope your gaming is going well. And again, I would love to hear from you, and I will speak to you if you don't speak to me first next week. So I'll see you then. See you in 7 days. Be well.